It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
I think our track record in the last 20 years, how many NFC East titles, playoff appearances, and appearances in the NFC Championship game, those are some of the metrics I look at, and I'll compare our record with almost anybody.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
All right, Football at 4 powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by Prop Swap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bets, take your profit. Find out how at PropSwap.com. Download the Prop Swap app today. All right, a lot to unpack here with Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. They have a new podcast that dropped this morning at 6 a.m., and something tells me that you guys talked about the draft.
Nah, we went into the Phillies. What a tank of a season it's become. Who wants to talk about the Eagles at this point?
Very mediocre.
Just a draft. It's not like we spend a lot of time on the draft.
Very mediocre those Phillies are so far. What would you describe? Would you describe Howie Roseman's haul? 9 picks, mediocre, good, exciting. What is your overall view of the weekend?
Yeah, I mean that's for time to tell as far as any individual player. I always say that. I don't get into like the grades. I get into the approach. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, I appreciated their approach this year a heck of a lot more than I did last year and the year before. I felt like the fact that they took a lot of players that didn't address immediate need like cornerback or linebacker per se shows you that they were interested in getting the best players that they had ranked, and they will figure out a way to fill some of those other holes. I still believe going forward, and I appreciate a team that can stay true to its board. And this draft, that Mike, actually reminded me of a very Andy Reid era draft with its emphasis on the trenches.
All ready to go.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Both offensive line and defensive line, and kind of a lunch pail guys. I mean, that's how Andy used to draft, and that's how this draft reminded me.
Well, and Howie said, look, I know fans are going to get upset, but we are not going to apologize for drafting offensive linemen and defensive linemen. That's how we won our Super Bowl, and that's how we plan on doing it again. They took they took an offensive lineman, more on that later, 2 defensive ends, 2 defensive tackles. So they went heavy on the lines. And I think your point is a good one, Geoff, where people were angry in round 2 and 3 that they didn't get that corner that everyone feels they need, and that's them saying they didn't have a corner ranked high enough on the board to take.
Yeah, that would be my assumption that they didn't. And it's made it not be that the corners were that bad, but Landon Dickerson, if you take the injuries away, not that you can't, but from talent alone, I was told top 25, and I wasn't told that by the Eagles. I just mean like when I did my homework around the league. People think that this guy is a monster. He is a monster. He's a real lunch pail guy. In fact, I was told that he asked the Eagles if he could just drive up instead of flying to he wants a camper. He wants to be camped out there. He's just I think the fans are going to absolutely love him the way they love Jason Kelce. But he's 330 pounds. He's a monster, and I think he's going to be a real problem for defensive linemen if he's healthy and can play.
Now, Geoff, last 2 Wednesdays ago, Andy Weidel said he was asked about guards specifically, Slater, Very Tucker, and he said, a guy who could wear multiple hats, that adds a lot of versatility, adds a lot of value. I mean, do they look at Landon Dickerson as a guy that can play all 5 spots and adds depth and value to 5 positions on this offensive line? I mean, in other words, saying we could draft one guy to fill almost 5 needs.
Yeah, I don't know they envision him as a tackle, but certainly as someone who can play center and guard. He's got that prototype. I mean, you're right. He's 335 and 6'6", so you can understand why tackle.
He did play some tackle at Florida State.
He did. So he has that experience, but they view him as kind of a monster road grader type of interior offensive lineman who's going to take over for Jason Kelce. It's probably going to allow them to do a little bit more with their run game as far as more power along with the zone. Now, I said, will they still be able to run as much outside zone as they do? Kelce's such a great athlete. He can kick out to the second level. He can get on the screens, and this guy is supposed to be a tremendous athlete as well, so I don't think they have to change what they do, but they may have a little bit more beef. Well, they definitely have more beef up the middle to be able to, drive block defensive linemen and get that middle game, run game going.
Yeah, I know a lot of people were scratching their head there because of the injury histories as well. You know, everybody's comparing it to Sidney Jones. So that one's an obviously risk. Now, in round 3 is where a lot of people are talking because of this viral video that got out of obvious disagreement inside that front office. Now, is that something that's normal? Is that something that people should be alarmed? I know it's a bad look for a team that already has a lot of bad press inside that front office, but is it being overblown?
Potentially, but maybe not. It all depends on, how quickly that it all depends on this, Mike. Is that you're right that, and I've checked around on this, there are teams around the league that have this happen all the time. The war room could be a very, very feisty place. I mean, obvious, and Howie was upfront about that. People put a lot of hard work, and when they don't get their guy, there can be people who are not happy about it. And that's what I was told with Donahoe. He had other guys in mind at that spot, and the Eagles went in a different direction. Now, can Tom be okay with that? Is the front office okay? Going to be more unified, or is this going to linger? What I don't know is this part of the uneasiness between the old school field scouts and the analytics department? Because we do know analytics plays a big part in the Eagles draft. And I imagine when you draft a 275-pound defensive tackle who's got some pretty good athletic measurements to him, if not the ideal size, then analytics probably played a part. Now, I'm not saying I know that that's the issue. I'm just talking about the overall, Tom Donahoe has been in the league for a long, long time, and he has that reputation of being an old school scout, and the way the Eagles do things is not always old school. So is it the next day everything's fine, or is this going to linger? That I don't know, but I agree with you in that it's more that it's a bad look for a team that was already battling a perception that it's not a house united. But if you watch the video, it's not like there's competing factions here. It seemed like everybody else was pretty happy, including the defensive coordinator, and that Tom was the one that really was disgruntled about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, I was listening to Louis Riddick on the radio 2 weeks ago tell a story about when he was in Washington, and you had one half of the room fighting for Kellen Winslow and the other half of the room fighting for Sean Taylor. And it was legitimate that you had people screaming back and forth at each other. And I liken it to if you have a partner in fantasy football and one guy wants to draft a running back and you want to draft a wide out and you can't agree, and it's like, just take the guy you want, because you almost don't want to fight about it. But how I kind of looked at this was, there's going to be – you have 10 guys in a room. Not all 10 are going to say, yes, Milton Williams is the guy that we all want.
Correct. And, when you get to the third round, Mike, you start to get to a terrain where it's not like the first round where some guys are just so much obviously better than others. You have your grades on them, but, you might compare a defensive tackle to a wide receiver to a safety who are all similarly graded to a linebacker. And at that point, you have to kind of make an executive decision between players of different positions that you have ranked. And so not everybody's always going to be happy.
Yeah, so I guess, without kind of going through each player here, they ended up with only one corner. So, I mean, I would imagine, and people are like, they needed a corner, they didn't get a corner. They made a deal for Ronald Darby a couple of years ago. I feel like a deal like that is probably the likeliest way because they have to know they need another guy in that secondary. And I feel like that is a way. Now, they didn't trade Ertz. Is there a deal out there where Ertz and Darby type of, not for Darby, but I'm saying like that, is that a player for player? They loaded up and got a couple extra picks in next year's draft. Do they go that route? I feel like there is a deal for a starting corner that has to be out there for them.
Well, yeah, you remember when they got Darby, they traded a third-round pick and Jordan Matthews, which a lot of people at the time had a hard time coming to the grips with the fact that Jordan Matthews wasn't the receiver that they kind of thought he was. And same thing here with Zach Ertz. I don't know if you're going to get a Zach Ertz for a cornerback unless the corner is not very good. If he's someone pretty decent, it's probably going to be Zach Ertz and something for that cornerback because the market has already told you, the league has already told you what it feels about Zach Ertz. Nobody's given up anything to get him, not even, in a draft where you have the ability to kind of move up and move down in any given round. I still think he will be off the roster. I still think that there'll be something the Eagles do. It just probably won't be as demonstrative as you might have hoped for or wanted for. Adam Kaplan reported there was a team that had no problem making a deal with Ertz as far as compensation, but the money, because of Ertz's $8 million salary, was an issue. And, a lot of teams this year were tight against the cap because the cap did not go up, it went down, right? So that was a problem for a lot of teams, and it remains an issue for a lot of teams. So they're going to have to figure something out. And I do believe they will, and I think Howie is right when he says that free agency and team roster building doesn't stop at the end of the draft. And, the Darby acquisition is a good example of that.
Not only that, right, you're seeing a bunch of guys, now today, they're not getting their fifth-year options picked up. You've got a bunch of movement that's going to start happening now post-draft. After June 1, you'll probably see a bunch of other guys. So I would imagine that the starting corner opposite Slay is not currently on this roster. Would you agree?
You know what? I would say it's 50-50. You hope so. You hope that Howie's able to find a deal. I do think he'll look hard and get something done. At the end of the day, though, I just don't know who it's going to be and if it's someone who has accomplished like Ronald Darby was at the time, being a second-round pick and having some pretty decent success with Buffalo, yeah. If it's a corner who's in the twilight, you're not like a Patrick Robinson type guy who actually wound up being a great slot corner for the Eagles. But if it's someone who's on the downside and not as good as you would hope, then you would think that that Zach McPherson would get a really good hard look as long as he can come in and fulfill the promise of being a fourth-round pick there.
Well, that's another thing, Moshe. All right, so they take Milton Williams, the defensive tackle. They took Landon Dickerson. Obviously, there was a lot of corners that went in between there. You wonder, did someone take one, or did they not view these guys as outside corners? They've got a lot of guys to play inside. You got Maddox, you've got LeBlanc. I don't think Roby Coleman is signed yet, but I guess if he's still sitting out there, essentially you could bring him back if you want. But maybe they didn't view the guys that were available as outside corners.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to aim to find out more, but that's clearly a good insinuation. I know just in my own homework, some people felt Asante Samuel would be better as a nickel corner on the inside. Yeah. There are a couple of guys there that I got. Eric Stokes went in the first round to Green Bay. A lot of people ripped the pick. A lot of people think that was an overreach. Trying to think who else was gone after the Eagles picked. In the second round, or who was on the board, I should say. Well, but it was not a strong corner
the
class.
One pick in round 2, there was not – Asante Samuel went 47, but there was only 2 corners taken in that second round after them. There was Kelvin Joseph went to Dallas, and then Asante Samuel. Other than that, the corners, there was a run of them late in the third.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, Kelvin Joseph is from Kentucky, right? Didn't he start off at LSU and have some issues there and wound up in Kentucky? So, first of all, corner is the one position every year in the draft that you see big runs on because everybody wants to get their hands on him. And the fact that only 4 in the first round and then not too many went in the second round shows you that there was a lot of divided opinion about these cornerbacks. So I can't – if that's how the Eagles had it evaluated – and you're talking about a lineman who they may have a first-round grade on, then I can't really knock them for going with the player because I always advocate you don't bypass, Pro Bowl level talent, starter level talent for a guy who you are on just because you need to fill the position that guy plays.
Right. Yeah. So that was the one thing all weekend people say they didn't get a corner. Evidently, they didn't have a corner that they liked high enough to take one in that spot. And if you're a best player available, guy, they did that. You might not like that was their best player available, but that's who they ranked the highest. And it's obvious they went that route. 5th round, they get Kenneth Gainwell. Interesting. They add a running back. I've heard him being described as like a Darren Sproles type of player.
Yeah, I think the Eagles lucked out. Maybe not so much Kenneth Gainwell for opting out last year, but the Eagles did because this is a kid with boundless potential who has the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield in a variety of ways. I mean, you talk about he walks into a team now where the offensive coordinator last year had Austin Eckler. The head coach had Naheem Hines, and both of those teams figured out ways to get the ball into the hands of those guys. And I would say Gainwell may have more explosion and natural receiving abilities than both of them. I mean, Eckler's really good, but I mean, Gainwell, had he played this year for Memphis, probably would have an opportunity to get himself into second or third round territory with a year of improvement upon the year that he had before he opted out, because he's got moves, he's got an explosion. Now, people will probably get annoyed with his I call it Bryce Brownitis. If you remember Bryce Brown in those 2 games that he had for the Eagles, where everybody thought he was going to be Barry Sanders, but he had this, he wanted to bounce everything to the outside, as some backs tend to do, and especially the undersized guys like Gainwell. He's got to learn to be a little bit more of an interior runner. But as a first-year player here coming into the system, he has a chance to at least get the ball in his hands as a receiver and do some things that I think even Boston Scott probably isn't able to do, as far as lining up in the slot and being able to run routes and things of that nature.
Geoff Mosher, the Inside the Birds podcast, you guys went into a lot of intel on that day 3, where really, Geoff, they went heavy defense, defensive tackle, 2 defensive ends, and then a safety / linebacker. So give us a little insight on what you know about all that defense they added on the final day of the draft.
Yeah, Tui Pelotu from USC, Marlin. He's a guy that, if you talk to some people, they felt like he was going to go higher than the was it 6th that he went, or 5th? Now
6th.
6th, right? Higher than that, because he's really technically sound. Apparently, he has some injury history that they asked him about, and he didn't really want to divulge, so that might have knocked him down a little bit. But one thing I've reported a while back, Mike, and it's kind of small, but it's still significant, is that one of the difference in this defensive line schemes, there's going to be a couple of differences. One is that I heard that Jonathan Gannon was looking for a little bit of a pure nose tackle, which the Eagles really haven't had a nose since maybe the Chip Kelly day, like a Benny Logan.
Yep. Someone
who's more of a run stopper, who lines up right across from the offensive lineman and tries to occupy that gap so that your linebackers can swarm in. But that's what this guy did at USC. He played nose and 3 technique. 3 technique is like what Fletcher Cox does, and gets upfield. So this guy has the ability to do both, so that makes him versatile. He'll probably try to compete for that 4th defensive tackle spot as a run stopper, maybe backup or second string run stopping line, and with the ability to kind of get developed and hopefully then become a 3rd defensive tackle, if not more than that. But that to me, I think, is interesting, because it does show that they wanted a little bit more of a difference than last year or last few years, right? When it's just play the run on the way to the quarterback, in that one gap scheme that Jim Schwartz played. And then that also kind of speaks to Milton Williams and Teron Jackson,
yes,
the Coastal Carolina kid. These kids are Milton is short-armed and Teron is only 6'2", so they don't have ideal arm length or size, right, in those situations. But I'm told that you're going to see a lot more stunting and looping and twisting, a lot more what they call line games, which is not what Jim Schwartz did either. He was just get up the field, stay in your rush lane. Mike Zimmer's defense does a lot of that. And so when you have guys who have small arms, that's okay if you're moving them around a lot, right? Because they're not head up on the offensive lineman. They're almost moving laterally and they're going around each other. It makes it harder for the offensive lineman to get their hands on him. But these guys are considered, that the Eagles brought in, good athletes and known for their athleticism. So that should be the advantage they have in trying to integrate into the scheme.
Yeah, and Patrick Johnson, he was the Tulane kid. He was the 7th-round pick. And then Jacoby Stevens is the safety, who I would imagine the Eagles, when they put their Twitter out, had Stevens listed as a linebacker. So I would imagine they're going to give him a try to play linebacker.
Yeah, it's funny. You got like a safety now moving to linebacker. They moved the defensive end that they got from Cleveland to linebacker. Jannard Avery. So they're trying everything. I mean, my only criticism with the Eagles, and it's not this draft, it's just your overarching philosophy, is if you're not going to put a lot of money into the linebacker spot and you're never going to draft the linebacker in the first round, you really should try to address an important position in the 2nd or 3rd rounds. Now, I'm not saying you should reach, but I do wonder if every time you come across a linebacker that you have graded in that round 2 or round 3 area, and then you have that either defensive end or some other position, offensive lineman, that also has a similar grade. If you're naturally going to always gravitate toward the trenches, then that linebacker spot's going to constantly be ignored. And I'm going to work on it, but I'd love to know, where they had the kid from Notre Dame who was on the board graded as opposed to Dickerson, which is the guy that they went to. And I get it. Again, Dickerson, a first-round talent. Maybe they didn't view JOK as a first-round talent, but if you're going to do this year after year after year, you got to figure out a way to get talent at that position in other ways then.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes back to, when they rank best player available, how much emphasis do they put in ranking that a player of a position they don't value?
Right. And, a couple of years ago, they talk about the formula to winning a Super Bowl and building in the trenches. Sure. But a couple of years ago, they took Michael Kendricks in the second round and Chip Kelly took Jordan Hicks in the third round. And, those guys I know Jordan got hurt that season, but he was a heck of a linebacker. And Kendricks came in and played pretty well. Even though he was kind of an up and down player, he played fairly well there when he had to fill in as they won the Super Bowl. So at some point, you really do have to, and safety too. I scream about it all the time. At some point, you're going to have to put some draft capital in a safety, and it can't be round 6 every year or round 4 every year. It's probably got to be in the second or third round.
All right. Devonta Smith, obviously at the top of the class. A lot of people – I didn't get to talk to you about the trade, going from 6 to 12 to 10. There's two things. I like Smith. I like the fact that they jumped the 2 spots up to get the guy that they wanted. But there's a part of me that wonders if they stayed at 12, would they have got the deal that the Bears gave the Giants?
I mean, I'm sure it's probably would have. I don't think there's a wrong answer here because I've heard this debated. There's certainly some merit to maybe staying and making that trade and picking up future capital. But, the Eagles, I can't knock them for thinking we don't want to be picking top 10 or top 12 a whole lot. And we haven't had the opportunity to get ourselves an elite top 10 type playmaker in quite a while. Yeah. And as I understand it, he was higher rated on their board than even Jalen Waddle was. So I'm not going to knock them for taking advantage of this opportunity.
I'll tell you, Moshe, they avoided if you stayed at 6, you could have had Chase or Pitts because they were both gone. Yes. And if you're saying that they had Smith ahead of Waddle, were you going to take Smith at 6? Maybe. You ended up getting him at 10 and added a first-round pick, so then they hit a home run.
Correct. I was going to say, you still got a future first-round pick, and you got a guy who's considered to be an elite playmaker in the league. So, yeah, I can see when you move down, I always say it's fine. You give yourself more chances to get a hit, but you also take away your opportunity or your percentage of getting an elite player.
Yeah.
So,
at 20, if they make that same trade that the Giants, you go to 20, Kwity Paye is 21, and I know that's a guy that they probably would have felt comfortable taking at 20, and then they would have added another pick. And that's where I'm like, man, that would have been an interesting option.
Yeah, it would have been. Certainly would have been very Eagles-like to do that.
Yep.
But I think it's okay to do something that's aggressive. We always applaud Howie for being aggressive, and to be able to go up and get a receiver. This is the highest they've ever drafted a wide receiver since I think 1984. Something crazy like that. So it's been quite a while.
I saw they're the first team to draft receivers in back-to-back first rounds in 16 years.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
How about that?
All right. At Geoff Mosher NFL, Inside the Birds. You can, of course, check out today's podcast. It dropped at 6 a.m. They'll have another one out for you on Thursday with more all-season, more stuff. And, of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Moshe. Good stuff, man.
All right, my friend. Have a great one.
And Moshe will be back on Wednesday. Andrew DeCecco will recap the entire draft, all the picks. He has all the deep knowledge of some of those later round picks. So we'll get his take on that coming up on tomorrow's edition of Football at 4.